Welcome to Chapter 5 of Wounds of Ash, Book 1 of the Vendi Chronicles. Chapter 5. Ellie sat in the wooden rocking chair Josen had commissioned as a wedding gift. A fire burned in the stone fireplace, warming their small stone quarters and making her golden hair glow. She hummed a familiar lullaby as she sat embroidering a baby swaddle. This one would have small, light blue flowers along the edges. Her slender fingers worked skillfully, and she was so engrossed in her work she didn't notice Josen staring at her from the doorway. He loved catching her like that, so focused on her work. It reminded him of the first time he had seen her, sitting on a decorative sofa at her father's mansion. She had been reading a book at the time. He had not been able to look away. Like now, she had not noticed him staring at her. She had not been aware of his arrival until he had joined her family for dinner that evening. They had been seated across from each other, and he was aware of her shy glances at him. It had been hard not to return her looks. He had made it through the meal without openly staring at her, and Kano had teased him about it later that night. It was not often that Josen got more female attention than he did. His teasing had promptly stopped the next day when Ellie asked to accompany them into town. Josen had spent the walk into town getting to know this beautiful woman. She had an amazing mind and was tired of living the life of a noblewoman. She wanted the opportunity to help people, not be cloistered in her father's house, waiting for him to find the perfect suitor. They had talked each day after that, whenever Josen was not trying to make peace between her father and another nobleman who wanted more of their land. Had it not been for Ellie, the assignment would have been tedious. Josen had been stationed at her father's manor for over a month. During that time he had grown to love her. He had been awed when she returned his affections and had agreed to marry him as he was to return to Ringard. Her father had thrown her out that same day, and Ellie had never been happier. Memories of their courtship ran through his mind as he stared at her, memories he cherished. "You know the baby's just going to make a mess in that, right?" he teased from the doorway. She turned towards him and gave him a smile that brightened up their stone quarters even more than the fire. He walked over to give her a light kiss that turned into something deeper. "I would expect nothing less from our child," she said with a laugh, pulling away, "especially with how their father always comes in bloody and covered with dirt from training. Kano was able to knock some sense into you?" She eyed his appearance with a critical eye. "What makes you think?" He trailed off with a sigh and reached out to touch her growing belly. "Yes, it turns out I've been distracted lately, and he used that distraction to his benefit." Ellie took his face in her hands, her voice soft as she inspected him. "What troubles you, my love?" Her pale green eyes were penetrating, the gold flecks of magic becoming more prominent in them. Josen found himself getting lost in those eyes as he knelt beside her and took her delicate hand in his rough ones. His voice trembled, and he found himself saying, "Ellie, I'm worried. I'm worried for you, for the baby, and..." He gave a slight pause before looking down ashamed. "I'm worried about myself as a father." He waited for her response. Never had he been more humbled than at that moment. "Oh, Josen." Ellie's voice was tender as she took her hands out of his and again brought them to his face. "You will be a great father. I have no doubt about that." "How can you be so sure?" he asked, eyes still locked on hers. "How are you certain I am enough? Are you sure this is the life you wanted? A life of danger? Is it worth bringing a child into this kind of life? Your father..." "When I married you," she said, cutting him off, her voice firm yet tender, "I knew what I was getting into and what luxuries and safety I was giving up. The wife of the next High Protector cannot be someone who shies away from danger. She needs to be someone who can embrace the risks and look at the world not at what it is, but at what it can become. You are worth being that person for." Her confidence in him was stunning. She always saw more in him than he ever saw in himself. He held her gaze unblinking as tears began to form in her eyes. "Josen, I chose you each day, and I will choose you every day after that. This child chose you too, and they deserve to come into the world that can be better because their father will make it better. You will be a great father. I would not have agreed to marry you if I thought you would not." They sat silently as Josen took in her words. Tears formed in his eyes, and he stood up, taking Ellie with him. He embraced her, running a hand through her long golden hair. "Thank you," he said, voice full of emotion. "Thank you for choosing me and believing in me. I hope I will someday see what you see in me, but for now, thank you for loving me anyway." "You will be the best father anyone could ever hope for," Ellie said, face pressed against his chest. They remained like that, his arms tight around her, and Josen found himself clinging to her as if she were the one thing keeping him tethered to the earth. The scene changed in Josen's dream. The fire had gone out in the hearth, and the stone chamber was cold. A body lay in the doorway, a body with delicate features and golden hair, A long cut across the neck had killed her, and her hair was drenched with her own blood. "Ellie, my Ellie," he cried as he pulled her body onto his lap. He held her there, overcome with grief, her limp body a weight he would never forget as he rocked her back and forth. Kano put a comforting hand on Josen's shoulder as he sat down next to him. "Shit. I'm so sorry, Jos. We should have been fast enough." His voice cracked as tears filled his own eyes. He stayed there next to Josen, not saying a word. Time froze in that moment, the light from the small window slowly fading into dusk. Josen was not aware of his tears stopping. "Something doesn't make sense, Jos." Kano's voice broke the quiet, the first words either of them had spoken in hours. Josen's head snapped up. "Think about it," Kano continued. "The guards outside were mauled. Ellie was." He shuddered before pressing on. "Ellie had her throat slit with what looked like a Ringada blade, not claws." Josen stared unblinkingly as Kano again began to search the room. "Nothing was touched. Your furniture is intact. We cannot say the same for the rest of the keep. So, who killed Ellie?" Tears formed anew in Josen's eyes as he stared down at Ellie, this time with a searching eye. Her face was a mask of serenity, despite what she had suffered. As his eyes searched the rest of her body, he saw something clenched in her hand. Lifting her wrist, he tugged the item from her grasp. It was the baby swaddle she had been working on. Kano gave Josen a long look before continuing with a sigh. "I'm going to search for survivors, and to see if anyone else was killed the same as..." He paused, in the same way. When he did not get a response, he bowed his head and left. With each step his friend took out of the stone chamber, a numbness began to set in. Josen kissed Ellie's head again, and words he had not been able to say in his friend's presence began to pour out of him, words meant only for her. "I am so sorry, Ellie. I promised you protection. I promised you they would keep you safe while I was gone. I promised that you would be able to live a peaceful life, that we would raise a family and teach our children to be as sweet and gentle as you, but with the hearts of warriors. I failed you, my love. I am so sorry." He hugged Ellie to his chest, kissing her cold head before burying his face in her hair. The light from the window had fully turned to dusk, and the shadows in the room lengthened. Time had again stalled at that moment. How long had Kano been gone? "I must go now, my love. I have to let you go now. I don't know if I'm strong enough. You were the brightest part of my life, a force of good amidst the darkness. I never deserved you, but I am so thankful for the time we had together. Thank you for loving me and letting me love you in return. Oh, Ellie." He found himself crying into her hair, and he lifted her carefully off the ground and placed her onto the bed. He arranged her so she looked like she was sleeping and caressed her face one last time. He found the swaddle from where it had fallen to the floor and tucked it into his pocket. Grabbing a lantern off the wall, he followed after his friend. His heart tore and ached with each step he walked away from Ellie. Soon all that was left was a gaping void nothing would be able to fill. He awoke disoriented and sat up with a start. He was not in his stone quarters at the keep with Ellie. He had not just held her limp corpse in his arms. No, he was in a tent in the snow, hunting down her murderer. He lay back on his bedroll, the phantom weight of her corpse in his arms. He ran a shaking hand over his face, wiping away the tears that had come unbidden as he slept. With his other hand, he reached into his pants pocket and pulled out a stained piece of fabric. The blue embroidered flowers were bright, despite the dust and dirt that had accumulated on the once white fabric. He rubbed a thumb over a flower before bringing the swaddle close to his chest. With a great heaving sigh, he let the tears fall for what might have been had he not lost everything.